Namaskar. Well, friends, I heartily welcome you all to Bhim Bhashya, my audio-visual podcast series on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. This audio-visual podcast series has 54 short speeches on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, unraveling as many as 25 different dimensions of his multifaceted genius. Friends, this podcast series is focused on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, his thoughts, his actions, his philosophy, and above all, the grand vision that he had seen for the entire nation. That is what this series is all about. So let's proceed. Well, friends, in this 54th and the final episode, I'm going to focus on Dr. Ambedkar as a national leader, not a Dalit leader, not a leader of the oppressed classes alone, but truly a national leader in the league of Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, Sardar Patel, and so on. Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was undoubtedly one of the most illustrious sons of India. He appeared on the Indian socio-political scene in the early 1920s and remained at the forefront of social, cultural, economic, and political transformation of our country during the closing decades of the British Empire. After India became independent from the British rule in 1947, Dr. Ambedkar played a significant role in laying the foundation of modern India. Dr. Ambedkar was a great social reformer, crusader of human rights, and an emancipator of the downtrodden masses of our country. He was truly an intellectual colossus and a great national leader who dedicated all his life to bring a new dawn of enlightenment to modern India. Dr. Ambedkar's life was an incredible saga of struggles and achievements, although he was humiliated at every step of the way. From childhood to his youth, he succeeded against all odds and secured the highest and the most reputable degrees from world-class universities. He had master's degree from Columbia University in United States. The year was 1915. He had a PhD from Columbia University, PhD in economics. The year was 1917. Then he went over to England, and there he had Doctor of Science degree in economics from London School of Economics, and alongside he also became a barrister. He got the degree in law, barrister at law. So looking at all his degrees, Dr. Ambedkar was essentially an economist. In fact, I dare say, and I'm an economist myself, Dr. Ambedkar is the finest economist that India has given to the world. That is what Dr. Ambedkar was. Dr. Ambedkar returned to India with all these degrees and devoted his life to the fight against the caste-ridden Hindu social order, which was characterized by injustice and denial of human rights. Dr. Ambedkar, without being favored either by family fortune or political lineage, but by sheer grit of his determination, hard work, and supreme courage and selfless sacrifice, overcame bitter political opposition and ills of caste discrimination to become the principal architect of the Constitution of the independent India. He then proceeded to build a more equitable society capable of delivering social justice to millions of the downtrodden. In this process, Dr. Ambedkar emerged as the conscious keeper of modern India. It is not surprising that Dr. Ambedkar was voted in August 2012 as the greatest Indian after Gandhi, with an overwhelming majority of votes in an e-poll that was initiated by some TV channels, including History TV 18, CNN, and IBN. Many Indians, especially the middle class and the elite, found the results of the e-polls somewhat surprising. The top 5 voted as the greatest Indians after Mahatma Gandhi were Dr. Ambedkar, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, Vallabhbhai Patel, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Mother Teresa in that order. Dr. Ambedkar was chosen as the greatest Indian after Gandhi in spite of being largely kept away from the mainstream media and even in the Indian educational system. Traditionally, the textbooks in India are replete with stories of life and times of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. The pedagogy portrays them, and rightly so, the leaders of national stature. In prose and poem, skit and song. Regrettably, however, Dr. Ambedkar appears only marginally, and even when he does appear, he is invariably referred to as the leader of the untouchables. Dr. Ambedkar's representation in pedagogy has always been more as a caste leader and not a national leader. It was Dr. Ambedkar, ironically, it was Dr. Ambedkar who maintained, and I quote him, "We all must be Indian first, Indian last, and nothing but Indians in between." It is grossly unfair to characterize Dr. Ambedkar simply as the leader of untouchables or Dalits, as is often done, even in otherwise responsible quarters. Dr. Ambedkar was not simply a leader of untouchables and oppressed people of the country, he was a national leader. Dr. Ambedkar's erudition, his mass movements, his role in the government in heralding action towards inclusive growth, gender equality, emphasizing education for all, employment and skill development with liberal welfare measures clearly shows that he was a patriot of sterling order. In the course of his most eventful life, Dr. Ambedkar made an outstanding contribution as an economist, sociologist, anthropologist, educationist, and so on. And in this Bhim Bhashya, in this audiovisual podcast series, we have taken care of 25 different dimensions of Dr. Ambedkar's multifaceted genius. Dr. Ambedkar returned to India in 1923 after completing his Doctor of Science. In 1924, he entered public life, and for the first 10 years of his public life, from 1924 to 1934, Dr. Ambedkar devoted to bring out reforms while remaining within the fold of Hindu religion. The first movement he started was in 1927 for accessing water. The place was Mahad in Maharashtra. In Mahad, there was a lake which was in principle open to everybody, though not in practice. Strangely, even animals could access water from that lake, but untouchables could not. Dr. Ambedkar led the famous Mahad Satyagraha, or non-violent resistance, to assert the right of the untouchables to have access to the water reservoir used by all. More than 10,000 people for the first time came together and went in procession to execute the law which had permitted them to take water. Then he played a prominent part in Kalaram temple movement in 1930 for the entry of the depressed classes into Kalaram temple in Nashik. So in his initial years, Dr. Ambedkar tried to stay within the Hindu fold and reform it from inside. By the year 1935, he had realized, however, that the religion is not going to change, and so he made a historic announcement in a place called Yevla in Nashik, where he said, and I quote him, "I was born a Hindu. I had no choice, but I will not die a Hindu." Unquote. Dr. Ambedkar announced his intention to quit the Hindu religion and embrace some other religion. Dr. Ambedkar worked on different religions for 21 years, became an authority on comparative religion, and merely 50 days before the end of his glorious life, he converted himself to Buddhism along with 7 lakh of his followers on 14th October 1956. During 1942 to 1946, Mahatma Gandhi announced Quit India movement. The British came with a counter strategy to include some of the Indians into the British cabinet in India, and 12 people were taken, out of which 6 were British and 6 were Indians. Dr. Ambedkar was one of the Indians inducted in the cabinet. So in July 1942, Dr. Ambedkar was sworn in as the minister in the British cabinet in India. The members of the cabinet were then called as members of Viceroy's Executive Council. During 1942 to 1946, when Dr. Ambedkar was the labor member or labor minister, he had many departments under him, including labor, employment, water management, electricity, minerals management, and most importantly, public works department. Presently, there are several different ministries covering these areas, 20 plus ministries. Dr. Ambedkar handled all of them at once. Dr. Ambedkar did a remarkable job in all these departments. It was Dr. Ambedkar, as the British minister, who started the employment exchanges in India. The credit of starting the first ever skill development program in our country also goes to Dr. Ambedkar. There were so many acts that were passed with regards to labor welfare in India. The labor welfare reforms were initiated by Dr. Ambedkar, and it included reducing the working hours of industrial workers from 12 to 8, paid leave for workers, maternity leave for women, and so on. All these provisions were brought in by Dr. Ambedkar as a minister in the British cabinet. These reforms are widely known, but many do not know that the pioneer of all these reforms was Dr. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar also took a great deal of interest in some of the major multi-purpose developmental projects such as Damodar Valley Corporation and the Mahanadi River projects. In fact, it was in designing the foundations of the emerging welfare state that Dr. Ambedkar played a major role. He not only had an academic vision, but also was a practical economic administrator. Dr. Ambedkar strongly vouched for the annihilation of caste. In 1936, he wrote a long speech which was one of his best, titled Annihilation of Caste, to address Jat Pat Todak Mandal, which was an organization for social reforms. Jat Pat Todak Mandal, based in Lahore, which was part of India at that time, invited him as the main speaker for their annual conference on the subject, Eradication of Caste, Jati Nirmulan. Before the conference, the organizers wrote to Dr. Ambedkar to send the draft of his speech so as to publish and distribute it to the participants attending the conference. Dr. Ambedkar sent the draft, which was far too strong for the organizers. Dr. Ambedkar had taken a very fundamental approach and argued that to remove the caste system in India, there is no other way but to destroy and discard Dharma Shastra. The Mandal, Jat Pat Todak Mandal, wrote to Dr. Ambedkar with a request to delete some part of the speech which they felt were controversial. But Dr. Ambedkar replied that he was not going to change a single word and asked them to cancel the conference if needed, if he is not allowed to share his thoughts the way he wanted. Finally, the conference was cancelled, and Dr. Ambedkar was so transparent and so democratic in his attitude that he published the written speech, not delivered, that he had in the form of a book, and he reproduced all the correspondence that took place between him and the Jat Pat Todak Mandal. The immediate reaction to this came from Mahatma Gandhi. This was the second debate Dr. Ambedkar had with Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, in his journal, Young India, which was later called Harijan, wrote two critical pieces against this book. Dr. Ambedkar gave a rebuttal to this in the second edition of the book, in which the whole entire correspondence, the speech and Gandhiji's objections and Dr. Ambedkar's rebuttal, they were all incorporated. Mahatma Gandhi basically was the supporter of the Varnashram system, justifying caste system as nothing but division of labor. It was Dr. Ambedkar who pointed out that the caste system is not based on division of labor, but superimposed on division of labor is division of laborers. No other country in the world has superimposed on the division of labor division of laborers, which is based on accident of birth. Dr. Ambedkar argued that the caste system is an ascending order of reverence and descending order of contempt. On politics, Dr. Ambedkar wrote 11 books, including treatises such as Pakistan or Partition of India. The demand for Pakistan was made for the first time in March 1940, and by the end of that year, that is within 8 months, Dr. Ambedkar produced a 480-page book on Pakistan. This was the first book of its kind, and then there was a second edition which came much later in the year 1945 with the title Thoughts on Pakistan. In fact, at the time of discussion of partition, both Mahatma Gandhi as well as Muhammad Ali Jinnah, both of them regarded Dr. Ambedkar's second edition of the book, Thoughts on Pakistan, as a standard reference volume. Most people are not even aware that Dr. Ambedkar wrote such an important book. Dr. Ambedkar was a great champion of gender equality. As the first Law Minister of independent India, Dr. Ambedkar drafted and introduced the Hindu Code Bill. Pandit Nehru had gone on record at that point of time that even if my government comes down, I don't care, but we will support the Hindu Code Bill. It was, in fact, thought to be a precursor to the Uniform Civil Code. Dr. Ambedkar said that it would really empower women, and Pandit Nehru strongly supported. This was so revolutionary that intercaste marriage was allowed in that. Many prominent and progressive leaders, however, were against it. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the then President of India, wrote a letter to the Home Minister stating that the passage of bill would undermine Indian culture. Pandit Nehru gradually backed out and went on delaying the passing of the Hindu Code bill. Nehru called Dr. Ambedkar and said, we can't get the entire thing through in this session, so let's get 50% through, and then afterwards, when the first elected parliament will come, they will take care of the rest. You'll recall, we're talking about 1951, and the first general elections took place in year 1952. So we're talking toward that last phase. 3 weeks later, Pandit Nehru said to Dr. Ambedkar, I'm sorry, nothing will be going through in this session and I have to back out. Pandit Nehru could not push forward the bill in the parliament. Consequently, Dr. Ambedkar resigned in September 1951 from the cabinet minister's post. It is unfortunate that many institutions and even women's organizations do not recognize that Dr. Ambedkar was the only person who relinquished his cabinet minister's post in favor of a bill which espoused the cause of gender equality. However, Dr. Ambedkar's contribution to the cause of gender equality is hardly ever recognized and acknowledged. He is mostly regarded as the leader of Dalits. Regrettable. Dr. Ambedkar was the principal architect of the Indian Constitution, though some people raise objections. It is true that the constitution making was a collective effort, but the fact is that in the drafting committee which Dr. Ambedkar chaired, 2 members were never present, one of them died and one always was traveling abroad. So the entire responsibility fell on Dr. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar not only helped in terms of drafting the constitution, but he also piloted the constitution before the Constituent Assembly and gave it a final shape. There are volumes of debates of Constituent Assembly which should be read by everyone. The best minds in the country, about 290 of them, came together and discussed the future of the country in great depth and detail. And it was Dr. Ambedkar who built consensus among this cream of the society, the intellectual cream of the society, to arrive at the final constitution which he did. That is why he was the principal architect of the Indian Constitution. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who was in the chair of the Constituent Assembly, said that, and I quote, he said, I have been sitting in this chair watching the fascinating work that Dr. Ambedkar has been doing. I feel that nobody else could have done the job like Dr. Ambedkar, unquote. The contribution made by Dr. Ambedkar is remarkable and commendable. However, he was neither being duly recognized nor awarded for this phenomenal contribution. Even the title, the principal architect of the Indian Constitution, was not given by any Indian leader. It was given by none other than a person who was the British biographer of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Dr. Ambedkar was a critique of the linguistic reorganization of states. In 1955, Fazal Ali Commission was appointed to look into linguistic reorganization of states. The commission came out with its report based on a very simple principle: one language, one state. Apparently, it looked reasonable because language is a cultural thing that binds people together. Dr. Ambedkar wrote a book opposing this. He said, one language, one state is completely wrong. It should be one state, one language. Was this simply quibbling over the words? No, it had a vision behind it. Dr. Ambedkar pointed out that as per Fazal Ali's formula of one language, one state, in North India there would be fewer number of states which would be very large in size, like Uttar Pradesh, whereas in South there would be a large number of states which would be smaller in size individually. This would, he said, create a problem in future, creating a situation of the North versus the South. Dr. Ambedkar also suggested that each state should have same language, but it is not necessary that all people speaking one language should be in the same state. Dr. Ambedkar always had a national perspective. Dr. Ambedkar embraced Buddhism because of its basic philosophy and principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity for the creation of casteless society. More than 7 lakh people changed their religion on one day, that is on 14th October 1956. Mass conversions are not uncommon in the world history. In fact, the world history is replete with mass conversion. But this mass conversion was with a difference. This one was without any pressure of sword, without any pressure of gun, or without any incentive of money. It was the one and the only mass conversion in the world history where it was one and the only mass conversion in the world history where on the word of one person, more than 7 lakh people relinquished their religion to embrace a new religion without any offering made to them, any incentive given to them. This clearly portrays the spirit of Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. With Dr. Ambedkar's intellectual stature and monumental contribution in making equality and social justice as the cornerstone of world's most populous democracy, Dr. Ambedkar deserves an exalted position, a distinctive place in the Indian pantheon along with Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and others. This has not happened until recently. Dr. Ambedkar has traditionally been marginalized and diminished in stature. He has been relegated until recently only as a Dalit leader and at best as a principal architect of the Indian Constitution, and that too reluctantly. Dr. Ambedkar was awarded Bharat Ratna 34 years after his Mahaparinirvan in 1956, and that too when a non-Congress government came to power in the center. It is important to know that there is a growing nationwide recognition of Dr. Ambedkar across the entire spectrum of political parties, which is most welcome. Dr. Ambedkar is being rediscovered posthumously, being resurrected through the debates, discussion, and events propagating the vision and the mission of Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar has always had an everyday presence in the lives of more than 200 million strong Dalit communities throughout the country. His ideas and his legacy have consistently been inspiring the disadvantaged and the downtrodden in our country. In fact, on December 6th, which marks Dr. Ambedkar's death anniversary, 25 to 30 lakh people go to Chaitya Bhumi in Mumbai to pay homage to Dr. Ambedkar. It is heartening to see the widespread renewed interest in Dr. Ambedkar. Evidently, the Indian society has done enormous damage to itself by not recognizing the national contribution of Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar. It is indeed the need of the hour to correct the misguided impression of confining Dr. Ambedkar only as the leader of Dalits and understand him in his true nationalist spirit and place him in the galaxy of the great national leaders of our country. Well, friends, we have come a long way. This audiovisual podcast series began on October 14th. That was Dhammachakra Pravartan Din, and is concluding today on 14th of April, which is Dr. Ambedkar's birth anniversary. During these 6 months, there were a total of 54 short speeches, one each every Saturday and Sunday, covering as many as 25 facets of this multi-dimensional genius that Dr. Ambedkar was. This audio-visual podcast series has ended, but hopefully, somewhere on the way, your journey of exploring the great persona of Dr. Ambedkar has begun. I wish you all the very best in your intellectual journey. Thank you, Namaskar, and Jai Bhim.